Hello, my name is Benedetta Giovanola. I'm a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Macerata, where I also hold a Jean Monnet Chair Ethics for Inclusive Digital Europe, and I'm the president and co-founder of a university spin-off on AI ethics and governance. Today, I'm gonna talk you about AI ethics and governance to provide you with an introduction into the different aspects that are implied when we talk about the technological transformation and especially the digital one. And I'm going to focus especially on the ethical implications of these transformations. This is the overview of my lecture. So first, I will provide you with some insights into AI to try clarify what we mean by AI and what is the place of AI in the broader context of the digital transformation. Then I'm gonna focus on AI ethics and discuss with you the main topics in this field and also show you why an ethical approach to AI is fundamental and needed. And then, last but not least, I will delve into the European approach to AI ethics that spans between a focus on ethical values, principles, and requirements to a focus on structures of governance. Let's then start with AI. This is a very famous image. That's a photo that was taken back in the 50s, in 1956 in particular, in New Hampshire. And this is usually considered the birth of AI, of artificial intelligence. These are the founders of AI. Among them, we see McCarthy, which was also the one who first thought of this expression of this label, artificial intelligence. And these researchers met at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire exactly in 1956 to try work on what they called a conjecture. The conjecture that the human behavior and most importantly, human reasoning might be replicated in such a way that a machine could be programmed to reason in such a way as human beings do. So when artificial intelligence was born, it was born like the idea, or more specifically, the conjecture that had to be demonstrated that it was possible to come up with an artificial entity, let's say a machine that would replicate human behavior and most importantly, human reasoning. It is very important to mention this origin of artificial intelligence because it helps us understand also most of the debate that is going on nowadays that all revolves around a logics of comparison between human beings and AI systems. So questions like, is AI intelligent? Or is it as intelligent as human beings are? Is it more or less intelligent than human beings? These actually stem, I would say, from the original conjecture. So the conjecture regarding the possibility of having an artificial intelligence or an artificial entity that might be intelligent. And I will come back to this point in a while. So the reality actually is that artificial intelligence, rather than being sort of an entity, nowadays is a combination of different factors. It is first of all a combination of the power of computing. So the fact that we have computers with a much higher computing power than we used to had like years or decades ago. We have lots of data. These data are made available and accessible thanks to the pervasive use of internet, social networking services, and Internet of Things, app, and so on and so forth. And then last but not least, that's what is represented by the third image on the right, algorithms. So algorithms are basically systems of calculation or of computing. They are a set of rules that is given to a code, let's say, in order to try combine the different data in a way which is meaningful. Some of the most prevailing techniques in artificial intelligence are machine learning techniques. Machine learning is an approach that is based on statistical correlations depending on a huge amount of data. And the more data are available and the more consistent and trustworthy the correlation can be. So machine learning techniques are techniques that help to make provisions about the future based on past choices. A machine learning technique, for example, is the one on which recommender systems are based, the one on which our social media are based. So, for example, based on our past behavior, the system might recommend us a future behavior. Like, for example, if you think of purchasing goods based on the choices we did in the past, like the kind of, say, books we purchased in the past, an app can suggest me some other books that I might want to buy in the future. Books that sort of make a provision of what my interest in reading might be. And so this prediction is made based on the collection and interpretation, you might say, of data that I provided regarding my past choices. So in this regard, it is very important how the data sets are made, especially in the phase which is called the training phase. So when the system, the AI system, learns to establish this correlation. And it is also very much important how the algorithm is built, because if the data are not representative enough, if they are good enough, or if the algorithms have some flaws or bias as they are referred to, then also the outcome cannot be as good as we wish. There are also some specific sub-techniques in the machine learning domain, like, for example, deep learning that tries to work on neural correlation and try to simulate the way in which this correlation would happen in the human brain, even though in a very simplified way. Some of these techniques are also at the basis of the newer generation of AI system, so generative AI systems. So systems that do not just predict, so do not just make provisions, do not just make recommendations, but actually create something like texts or audios or images. But actually, the techniques on which these systems are based ultimately also revolve around systems of data correlation. So it seems that artificial intelligence is something which is very far from the idea of a sort of entity that would replicate human behavior in any regard. So we are now in a phase where we are kind of transitioning from narrow artificial intelligence to broader forms of artificial intelligence, but are not yet at the level of what is referred to as general artificial intelligence. So we do have AI systems that can work very effectively in specific domains. This is what is meant by a narrow AI. So, for example, they can make pretty accurate predictions in terms of consumer behavior. That can be very helpful in different domains, like, for example, the healthcare sectors. Um, and so we have these kind of AI systems, and we are transitioning, I was saying, to broader systems like the generative AI ones, or what is nowadays referred to as agentic AI. So, like agents that might perform tasks that were typically human tasks, but still, these are tasks that are not as general as I would be required to speak of a general artificial intelligence. Now, these are some of the examples of AI system. So one of the most famous one is Deep Blue. So an AI systems that managed to win against Kasparov, the chess champion. And the interesting thing was that the system came up with a move that it created by training itself against itself. And so it was a move that it has then been said a human being would not have ever come up with. Other examples of artificial intelligence are those that, in this case, refer to the outcome of Gen AI, like, for example, the photo of Trump taken by the police, or the photo or a former Pope with a very fashionable puffer jacket. So these are both images that have been created by generative AI, but that actually look very real. This, of course, raises a problem with regard to the trustworthiness of the information we might access. If we look at the general understanding of AI systems, and also if we look at most of the debate about AI, this spans between different opposite positions. This is also very nicely exemplified in some movies, in some films. So if you think, for example, of Minority Report, then Minority Report was based upon the idea that there would be there's the systems that would predict the possibility of specific individuals to commit crime. And so the whole movie, without spoiling it, is that it's um, it's very important to prevent crime. And so, if we know in advance whether a person would likely commit a crime, we can stop that person before the crime is committed. Um, Actually, there is something that has been used widely, extensively, especially in the US for a long time, which is exactly an AI-based system for predictive policing. The name of the system is Compass, and it has been widely used to try identify the propensity to committing crime or to committing again crime. And it was a system that had been very useful in the activities carried out by judges. But one of the problems that then came out with this system was that it was very unfair towards people belonging to specific groups. So, in particular, the system was uncovered to be discriminating against Black Americans, and so attributing a propensity to commit crime that was much higher for Black America rather than for white ones. And this was based on a series of flaws that the system had that then likely have been uncovered and then led to stop the use of the system. But this tells us already something very important. So, how impactful this system might be. So, something like what is described in Minority Report, which seems to us like a sort of fictionary word, actually is much, much more real than how we would expect it to be. Then usually there are two opposite scenarios in the representation of AI. So one is the scenario according to which AI would be a sort of terminator. Um, we would end up with a world dominated by machines that would eventually destroy us, or we have the other opposite, like for example in the film Her, where here the story revolves around a romantic relationship between a person, a human being, so the serving actor of the movie, and an AI system. And here, the story is a sort of story of relationship, a story of love, that sort of leads us to think also of the positive aspect of the AI system, like if you might eventually also engage in a love relationship with an AI system. So clearly, AI systems actually are not either tools that will eventually become subjects that will, destroy humanity. They're not even simply companions. They're not neutral. So it is very important to pay attention to the way in which these systems are designed, developed, and deployed. So not only the way in which they are deployed and used, but also the way in which they are designed and developed. Now, if we move from the representation in movies to real life scenarios, we can acknowledge that AI is much more widespread than we might think it is. So, AI systems are at the basis of certain genes. They play a huge role in cybersecurity issues. They can help optimize products and supply chains. They can be widely used in agriculture. They can use for shopping, for autonomous cars, for Internet of Things and smart home. They can be used for developing personal assistants, so they are already embedded in our laptops, computer, smartphone, smartwatches. So they are actually already cross-cutting in our existence and also in the profession that we do. There's also an extensive use of AI for political purposes. So AI based algorithms that would distribute attention, that would distribute access to information with some impacts that might eventually also regard the way in which public opinion is shaped, and that might also regard the way in which we gain the kind of knowledge, we as citizens gain and get the kind of knowledge that is useful for us to act when we have to vote. This is just to say that AI systems are not like a robot that might come and take over the world, but they are much more subtle and deeper tools that already interact with us, and that by interacting with us change to some extent also the way in which we are. And I will come back to this in a while. So if AI systems are so widespread, and if their effects can be so cross-cutting, Now it seems crucial to make sure that these AI systems work for the good of individuals and society, because their potential is really very, very high, and also because AI systems are not neutral. So AI systems always embed some form of values, sometimes also implicitly. So they're not simply tools. I mean, I use the word tools, but in the way in which the word should be used, namely as something that is never totally, completely under our control, something that we create. And in the very moment in which we create the tools also transform the way in which we act and the way in which we relate to one another. So it is very important when we talk about AI to of um, look at the transformation and the evolution of technology, because on the one side, AI has a disruptive potential. Some scholars have also talked about a proper revolution that would be brought about by AI. And this is true to some extent, especially because AI is, if you compare them with other kind of technology, is so enormously spread. Also, it is a potentially omni-purpose technology that can be used everywhere. Also, the speed at which it is developed makes AI something pretty unique. But at the same time, you might also claim that I mean, comes up at a certain phase of technological development. And here we can identify basically three main phases. The first phase is the phase where technology is pretty simple. So technology is a way of mediating the relationship between um, human beings and the external world. So some examples of the outcomes of technology might be very basic tools, if you want, like, for example, an umbrella, or shoes, like an umbrella helps you protect yourself from the rain, or shoes help you protect yourself against um, you know, something you might that might hurt you on the floor, or make your walking more comfortable. And these are all products that are made through specific techniques and later on technologies. In this case, the human being has a almost full control over these tools and over the technologies that are needed to develop them. Then there's a second phase of technology that can be called the phase of where technology is automatic. So this, for example, can be shown by technological products like washing machine, for example, where here the relation is no longer between human beings and like the external world, but it is between human beings and technology. Because, for example, if I want the washing machine to work, I push a button to make it work. So what the washing machine does is to turn something that was manual and that was made by human into something which is automatic and so can be made by the machine. But the interesting point here is that when the washing machine automatizes the act of washing, it does not so by merely replicating the way in which a human being washes, but it changes it deeply. And this is something which basically is true of every technology. So when technology starts to be part of our life, it also changes the way in which we act. If you think, for example, of the introduction of other technological products like the introduction, I don't know, of train or of planes. Think of how it changes, for example, our perception of space and time, and how we have changed our habits, for example, also to travel. And so the more the technology is pervasive and widespread, and the more, of course, it also affects the way in which we act. So this is particularly true about the third phase of technology, which we can call it the phase of um, potentially autonomous technology, which is the phase in which we are now, and that's the phase in which AI is placed. So here the idea is that the relationship is no longer either between human beings and nature, so external world, or between human beings and technology, but it is between technology and technology. So if you think, for example, of the way in which our smart devices are connected with one another, the way in which, for example, a hotspot might be automatically recognized by a device, or the way in which the different connections among our devices might be automatic. This is all a demonstration of the fact that these technologies are shaped in such a way that, in many regards, they do not need a human impact or a human action to work. So, for example, I can stop a connection with a specific hotspot, or I can change the settings of my mobile phone if I do not want this potentially autonomous connection to be put in place. But by default, the system is set in such a way that these autonomous connections are made. So this is very important, because here the point is also to always acknowledge that if these technological products have such an impact on us, and if they reach the point at which they can also be autonomous, making them really autonomous or not is our choice. It is a human choice. So it is not the outcome of a technological process. It is a human choice. So we have first to acknowledge that technology has evolved and is evolving very rapidly. We have to acknowledge how pervasive its impact is in terms of transformation of our behavior. And because of that, we have to design, we have to develop, and we have to deploy it in ways that are really beneficial for the human beings. And that's actually the role of ethics. So ethics can also be understood as something that gives us an orientation, that provides us an orientation, that helps us focus on the values and the principles, and also on some requirements that we would need, that we would require for technology, and more specifically for AI, to work properly, meaning to work for the good of human beings, both as individuals and as community and as society as a whole. So an AI ethics perspective can allow to identify both opportunities and challenges of AI. So avoiding that we, endorse AI as something which is intrinsically good, or as something which is intrinsically bad, but as something whose effect depends on how, again, it is designed, developed, and deployed. So, to sum up on this point, we can also claim that AI ethics allows us to understand that technology is never neutral, and also to acknowledge that technology is not something that determines itself. So we sometimes tend to think that technological development is unstoppable, that it is far beyond our control. And so we sort of believe in the idea of technological determinism, so that technology sort of determines and fuels itself. And we're just passive recipients, we're passive users of technology and can't do anything. But actually, if we start with this idea, we also end up believing in the myth of autonomous technology. So the idea that technology is already autonomous and we can't do anything, so we are sort of powerless. But this might eventually lead to a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy because it might lead us to design systems in such a way that they're really autonomous without taking into account the consequences that this full autonomy might have for us. Then an AI ethics perspective also allows us to think of the relationship between AI systems and human beings, not that much in the form of a comparison, but rather in the form of a relationship. Now, I said at the beginning that when AI was born, it was born um, based on the conjecture that it could be possible to replicate human intelligence and human behavior. And this is actually impacted a lot in the ways in which we still frame the debate regarding the relationship between AI and human beings. But this kind of framing of the debate leads us to think of AI and human beings as entities that might emulate one another. It also pushes us to have a logic of comparison. And so, for example, to compare human intelligence with artificial intelligence, or to raise questions like whether AI systems do have a conscience, whether they might eventually have one, if they are really able to understand, if they are really able to be creative, and so on and so forth. So this is something important, but actually what is missing here is a focus on what is mostly important for us. This is the way in which AI systems impact our life, the way in which they impact our behavior, the way in which they also impact on the way in which we relate to one another. So it is very important to shift attention from the comparison between human beings and AI to the kind of relationships that there can be between human beings and AI. So this would imply first, always to safeguard forms of meaningful human control. So to try avoid the full autonomous capacity of AI systems and try understand rather how we can design these systems in such a way that we can really support us, not replace us, but support us in meaningful way, augment our capabilities, cooperate with us rather than replacing us. But to do that, we really need a shift in the logics with which we think about the relationship between AI systems and human beings. Now, there might be different ways of framing AI ethics. There are actually many attempts, both in terms of scholarship and also in terms of policy. The discussion on AI ethics is a discussion that is carried out also at the global level. There are different frameworks to date that have been elaborated, also frameworks that apply to specific domains. But I'd like to focus on one framework that I think it's particularly interesting and useful, which is the European one. So I want to focus now on the European approach to AI ethics and also its implication in terms of governance, because actually the European approach to the digital transformation was steered by a very high interest for the ethical dimension of these transformations. Already in 2018 and 2019, the European Commission appointed a high-level group of experts to try come up with some guidelines that would steer the European way to the digital transformation and then later on to AI. Based on the idea that the European way had to be grounded on some values that would be distinctive of Europe. And this was also an attempt to try to find a digital strategy that would be specific of Europe. So a strategy that would be different, for example, from the strategy of other countries, more like going west, like for example the US, but also other countries like going east, like for example China and other countries. And so actually the digital strategy was also a way for Europe not only to give some guidelines like internally to the member states, but also a way to position itself as a global actor. So try to clarify what its role would be when it comes to such a strategic dimension as the digital transformation and more recently AI. So the first step was exactly the elaboration of these ethics guidelines by the high level expert groups. And then these guidelines prompted the communication by the European Commission clarifying the core concept of its strategy, namely the idea of trustworthy AI. Now, trustworthy AI in the European context means AI that is capable to create an ecosystem of trust involving all the different stakeholders. So the idea was that we need trust. So we need human beings, we need users, we need developers, we need the society at large to trust AI systems, but in order for AI systems to be trusted, they need to be designed, developed, and deployed according to specific standards. Let's say in a specific way. So they have to sort of gain, the trust, and this is why they have to be trustworthy. So, if we look at these guidelines elaborated by the high level expert groups, they distinguish three different steps or phases. The first step is what is called foundations of trustworthy AI. And here the idea is that we should look at the grounding principles of AI systems. And this principle how to adhere to fundamental rights. So fundamental rights is the cornerstone that helps us base AI systems on four fundamental principles, namely respect for human autonomy, prevention of harm, fairness, and explicability. So respect for human autonomy means that the AI system should never endanger human autonomy. And also, they should always preserve the capability for human beings to act freely and without too pervasive interference and eventually manipulation. The prevention of harm is a principle that regards the prevention from a negative impact that AI systems might have at the level of individuals or at the level of society as a whole. Fairness regards the potentially unjust inequalities that AI systems might amplify or might cause. And so here the idea is that we should look at this potentially negative impact in terms of fairness already in the design phase and make sure that the system we design, develop, and deploy don't amplify or don't create forms of unfairness or forms of unequal treatment. Like, for example, unequal treatment in the possibility to access to the job market, or unequal treatment in the possibility to have an access to healthcare, or unequal treatment in the possibility to, for example, aspire to highly qualified position. I'm mentioning these examples because there are also plenty of examples of AI systems that have been uncovered to be deeply unfair towards especially women when it comes to recruitment in the job market, or when it comes to possibilities of enhancing career in the job market, or systems that have been uncovered to be totally unfair to Black patients, for example, in determining the priority in the access to healthcare. So these are all spheres of our life where fundamental rights hold, and so ought not to be violated. And so here the idea is exactly that already from the beginning, so from the design phase, these potentially negative outcomes ought to be taken into account, ought to be prevented. Then the fourth principle is the principle of explicability, which requires that AI systems are not black boxes, so that the way in which they work, the way in which they make use of our data, they are comprehensible, they are intelligible for the different stakeholders involved, starting with the users. Now, this is the phase of the so-called foundation of trustworthy AI, so the basic principles to which AI systems ought to adhere. So that's the most abstract level. And then there's a second phase, which is the phase of the realization of trustworthy AI. So here the idea is, how can we make the four principles really enacted and achieved in AI systems? Well, the answer is by guaranteeing 7 requirements, whereby guaranteeing and ensuring these 7 requirements requires us to develop both technical methodologies and non-technical methodologies. Now, these are the 7 requirements. So the interesting idea also is that they are connected with one another, and mostly importantly, they are to be continuously evaluated and addressed throughout the AI system's life cycle. So the whole AI systems life cycle is exactly this idea of design, development, and deployment. And there's also the idea that there might be situations in which ensuring one of these requisites might conflict with ensuring another one. So developing an AI ethics approach also means to have a strategy for mitigating cases where complying with all these requisites might be hard. So it also requires a way of governing the potential conflict among requisites. So one of the most important requisites is human agency and oversight. So this is the idea that I was mentioning a while ago, that AI systems ought not to be fully autonomous. There should be forms of control. This might take the form of what is called the human in the loop or a human on the loop. So some of them are more feasible, some of them are less feasible, but let's say the basic idea is that at some point a human control should be put in place. Then another extremely important issue is the one of technical robustness and safety that of course also has to do with the technical aspects of the AI systems. Then privacy and data governance, so not just the protection of personal data, but also ways to establish how to pursue a governance of the data. So for example, where the data are stored, who are the data accessible to, for example, in an organization, what are the mitigation strategies in cases where, for example, there might be a data breach or there might be some cybersecurity threats. Then transparency. Transparency is a way also of enacting the principle of explainability. So the idea that AI systems ought to be intelligible for all the stakeholders. So it would not imply necessarily to disclose so many information about the code of the system um, or too technical information, because actually having an overload of information or accessing to detailed and technical information might paradoxically have the opposite effect. So preventing the users, for example, from understanding what the system is doing. Also, it could be something that would go against intellectual property rights or commercial like trade secrets. So what is meant here is just that it should be clear for a user how their data are used, for example, or what they are used for and how the system works, but in a very intelligible and clearly communicated way. Then we have the other requisite of diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness that points to the fact that, for example, when we develop AI systems that should be representative according to gender, for example, race, ethnicity, cultural background, because if the training phase is not representative, then it's going to be very likely that the system might amplify some form of prejudice or inequalities or just endorsing a single perspective or a single story. This has also an impact, especially nowadays, in the call for having also more interdisciplinary path to AI, also in terms of training, when you combine technical skills with an attention for ethical aspects, societal ones, legal ones, and so on and so forth. Then an attention should be given to societal and environmental well-being. So the impact of AI in society. Think, for example, of the impact that AI can have in terms of access to the job market, or in terms of transforming the job market, or in terms of changing many works or changing many tasks implied in different positions, or things in terms of society of the role of AI in shaping public opinion. So these are all aspects that ought to be taken into account. But think also of the environmental well-being. So here, clearly, this requisite revolves around the idea also of sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability, also, of course, social sustainability. Because on the one side, it has been demonstrated that AI might contribute to reach many goals in terms of sustainability and the sustainable development goals. But at the same time, it is also very highly energy consuming, especially in the training phase. the AI systems, also due to these huge computing powers that they require, would consume a lot of energy. And this, of course, does have a negative impact in terms of, the impact it has on the environment. So when we look at sustainability, we always have to look at it in a twofold way. So on the one way, how AI systems might contribute to reach objectives in terms of sustainability, and on the other side, whether they are sustainable or not. And then, last but not least, the issue of accountability, which also ties in with the issue of responsibility. So it should be clear to understand who is accountable, for example, for the decisions that are taken thanks to the support of AI systems. So far, the second phase. So we have seen the phase of the foundation, so basis of AI, the phase of implementation that help us make the principles enacted and respected effectively in the AI system. And then we have the third phase, which is the phase of the assessment of trustworthy AI. So here the idea is, once we have grounded or founded AI on the most fundamental values and principles, and then we have implemented these values and principles through requisites, and so have also created AI systems that are compliant with them, then we should also assess how compliant they are. And already in the document I mentioned, so in the ethics guideline, there was a first attempt of an assessment list that would guide different users and stakeholders in the evaluation of this ethical compliance. And there are nowadays even more advanced attempts to go in this direction. Now, the ethics guidelines were a fundamental step in the EU approach to AI ethics, and they can also be understood that the theoretical, philosophical basis that has also led most recently to the AI Act. So the AI Act clearly is not in the dimension of ethics, but that's rather in the legal dimension, being a regulation, so being the first regulation worldwide applied to AI. But as you can see, many of the areas that the Artificial Intelligence Act tries to regulate are based on the acknowledgement of the importance of some ethical principles. So, for example, as you might know, the AI Act distinguishes the AI systems on the basis of the risk that they might bring about. So, it distinguishes systems that might bring about an unacceptable risk, a high risk, a transparency risk, or a minimal risk, and then has a specific regulation and specific requirements regarding general purpose AI models that are subjected to specific rules. Now, unacceptable risk is a risk of violation of the European fundamental rights and values. So here again, you can see how much embedded in the ethical perspective all this is. So cases in which there is an acceptable risk, like for example, the risk of discrimination, a risk of manipulation, for example, like in the case of biometric surveillance, or in the case, for example, of social scoring systems, these are all prohibited. And actually, the prohibition entered into force as one of the first requirements that were enacted regarding the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. So, and then there is a second group of AI systems, namely those that are likely to bring about a potentially high risk. So these are, for example, the AI systems that regard the domain of healthcare, for example, so AI systems that might have an impact on health, but also on education, on training, on professional prospects. So also all the HR dimensions, so in terms of recruitment, so access to the job market, management of human resources. So in these cases, the AI systems should undergo an assessment before they are released and before they are commercially exploited. Then there is a third group of AI systems that is characterized by a transparency risk. So here, for example, this is a set of risks that might apply to situations where you might have, for example, chatbots that act like if they were human beings or replicate human language, or the product of generative AI might seem real, but actually it is fake. So also deep fake in this regard. And here actually the risk might be high, but they are put under minimal risk because the idea is that once there is a disclosure that these products are the effect of an AI systems, there's enough transparency for the user to treat them as product of an AI system rather than if they were like real images or real texts or real persons. We are talking to, like in the case of a chat box. So the risk might be potentially high, but it becomes a transparency risk because if there is transparency, so if their way of operating is disclosed, then the risk is minimized. And then there are other AI systems, like for example, spam filters that are under the category of minimal risk. So this is just to conclude a way in which we can see how AI ethics is important, starting from the theoretical background, and so the importance of acknowledging the transformative power of technology on us as human beings, then moving to the inquiry into the way in which technologies might bring about opportunities or also risks. And so we need a perspective that allows us to have a moral orientation, like the ethical perspective. And then last but not least, try to see how this can also be embedded in some policy document and initiatives, so like the ones that have been and are being carried out by the European Commission. So I hope I provided you with an if not with an exhaustive, but let's say with an adequate overview to have an idea of all the implications of the technological transformation, especially the digital transformation and AI on our lives, so that you can be ready to tackle more specific topics. Thank you for your attention.